I'm sure most of you who have watched any sort of personal development content on YouTube have come across the topic of habit tracking. Now, habit tracking is essentially where you virtually or on a piece of paper just keep track of the things that you want to keep track of in terms of your habits that you do per day. Maybe it's the time that you wake up and you go to bed, and also use some sort of calendar to keep track of your event-based information. Now, the main problem that I found with myself was not actually to do with the tracking, but more so to do with actually reviewing all that information that gets gathered. So in this project, what I'm going to be trying to do is to build some sort of AI agent that essentially looks at my Notion for my habit tracking, as well as my Google Calendar for my event-based information, and essentially combines the two sources to answer questions like, how many hours did I waste last week? And it would essentially go pull down the things from my Google Calendar, pull down the things from my Notion, and give me a report at the end of the week or at the end of the day on here's where you screwed up. So this is probably going to be some sort of video series, maybe multiple parts, where I essentially build this agent from scratch. And for this project, personally, I'm going to be using the Gemini 2.0 Flash models, mainly because they're cost efficient and I just want to learn how to use them. Now, friend David Goggins will probably be like, you don't need no AI agent to fucking fix your life, which is probably true, but we'll build it anyways. But with that being said, if you guys have any other suggestions for the rest of the upcoming videos, or you have an idea on how this thing should work, please do leave a comment down below. With that, let's get to some whiteboarding. So this is my habit tracker on Notion. I've just basically duplicated my actual one and just put in some dummy data here. But this is basically what we're going to be using for this agent. So here I would basically come in on any given day. I would start a new one of these, and at the end of the day, I'd just check off like what I did that day. So basically the goal of this agent is to help with two different specific tasks, right? One is to help with tracking and making sure that habit tracker is completed. And then the other thing is to do with reporting. So at the end of the week or at the end of the day, what I want to know is, okay, like what did I do right? What did I do wrong? What should I do the next week to improve, as an example. Now for the tracking section, what I want is information from the Google Calendar to go to my Notion database. And for reporting, what I basically wanted to do is essentially pull in information from both of these and produce some sort of reports for a given time frame, right? So before I actually open VS Code and start programming, one thing I do want to do is just outline a few of the classes that just come to mind on what I want to build. So definitely we're going to need some sort of LLM class that sends and requests to Gemini. That's going to be one class that we probably want to start with. The next thing is we're going to have to figure out how we handle tools. So we need some sort of class to basically build different tools for the agent. And then finally, we have the tools themselves. So we definitely need to use some of the APIs from the platforms that I was talking about. So for Notion, we probably need tools like to query that habit database, maybe to update that habit database. And then for Google Calendar, we probably need some sort of a tool to get events. So the first thing that I'm doing here is basically just importing Google's Gen AI package and just trying to figure out how their module actually works. So I'm just loading a Vertex API key, which I set up. And what we'll start to do is maybe just set up some sort of class to basically query Google. So looking at the Google documentation, we need self.clients.model.generate content, which takes in a model, contents, and a config. All right, so super simple class. It's just going to take in a API key. It's going to build this client, and then we're going to try to invoke that client and generate some content using this model name. Just build that class and see if our API key is working. Okay, we got some response. So from there, I essentially ended up creating a Notion integration and basically looked through the docs to figure out how to query the database and start setting up the Notion provider class. From there, I essentially set up the rest of the method and put in my bearer token and sent the first request to see it fail as usual, and then figured out that I need to actually add the agent as a connection to the database, and then also to see the next one fail, and then 45 minutes later figure out the reason was because there was a comma. So now that we got the Notion API access working, the next step was to give the agent an understanding of the properties that were within the database. So from there, what I essentially did was start building a function to print out the properties in a way that the agent can easily understand the type of property it is, as well as the different options that are available. Now, initially I made the mistake of actually excluding formulas, which I later fixed and actually included them, as that's where the real information is. So after including all the formulas, now we actually have a full list of everything that's available, including things like sleep time start, which actually is a pre-calculated field. So Now we have everything, and the agent can actually understand all the different properties and the different options that are within the database to actually make its decisions. So with step number 2 out of the way, the next step was actually to figure out how to query the database. And the reason that we set up step number 2 to get the properties of the database is because to query the database, we're going to be using the filters section of the API. So for example, if I were to ask the agent to tell me about my week, what it would first need to do is understand what is the current date and then use its properties list that it returns from our previous function to then filter on the actual date time properties that are in the database to retrieve only the pages that are relevant for that week. So the next step was to actually start building the query database function where it would take in a set of filters and then return a dictionary based on the pages it retrieved for those given filters. Now, since agents use docstrings of Python functions to actually figure out which tools to use and also what sort of schema to provide, I put all the information that was in the Notion documents page into my docstring to actually help the agent figure out what to filter on. So after finishing up that function, the next step was actually test it and get some pages for a specific date. So what I did was I filtered our Notion database and retrieved a single page for a single date. So now that we actually have these properties listed, what I'm trying to do is see if the LLM can just understand this given context and produce some sort of report given this, days of data. This isn't formatted in the best way. In fact, it's not a JSON structure and it's not a string. It's sort of in the middle. My prompt goes, below is a list of properties from a habit tracking database for a user. The habit tracker tracks multiple habits. I'm loading in the properties. And then given the following properties, I'm basically asking it to generate a report and to think carefully about what is a successfully completed habit versus unsuccessful. So now let's just see if we can try to get some initial report from this. All right, so we just got the reports. So this looks like it's marked down. So what I'll do is I'll save this into a markdown file and we'll open this up. All right, so here is our initial report. So this report analyzes the habits for Sunday based on the provided data. So it's figured out that it's Sunday. So sleep duration is the most concerning factor. The sleep time indicates 9 hours of sleep, which is outside of the ideal range. Recommendation, attempt to adjust sleep schedule. Sleep time 4 a.m. and sleep time 1 p.m. I don't know if that's accurate. Okay, this seems a bit weird, this part right here. I don't know where it's getting this data from. So overall, for a first just run, I think this is sort of essentially what I want the agent to do. We'll have to definitely tune the prompt from here, but I would say this is a decent initial start. All right, so just to recap where we are, we have an LLM provider class that can send and request to Gemini, and we have two functions here, invoke model stream, which just basically calls the endpoint. And then we have our Notion provider class, which is essentially our class to query the Notion API and retrieve different information regarding the database. And then we have this simple function here, generate properties list, which will basically just take that response and essentially provide a list with a string that contains some information about the property and then the actual values inside of them. Now, weirdly, this is where we saw that some of these are wrong. So for example, this says 4 a.m. and I'm guessing this is some sort of time zone conversion going on right here, because essentially if we take a look at the 23rd and we take a look at that property, you can see sleep time start and end are 11 and 8. Which then at the end of the day threw off our test report here. This is the end report that we got. This is for a single day. The agent would essentially look at multiple days and figure out what is going wrong or what is going right. I think this is a good place to end this video, and we can continue off by actually building the agent in the next session. Now that's going to wrap up part 1 for this video. And if you have any suggestions for the next video where we're actually going to be setting up the agent and getting it to do these things autonomously, please do leave them down in the comments below. But yeah, that's going to be it, and I will see you guys in the next one.